sanctuary, also one of our media outlets. Today is also another day that the Lord has made. So let us rejoice and be glad.
Good morning. Good morning. Please join me in the call to worship. Come, behold the reign of Christ.
Like the sun rising on the clouds morning, gleaming from the dew on the grassy land.
Come, behold the reign of Christ.
A power that shall not pass away, and love that will never be destroyed.
We belong to the reign of Christ.
The Alpha and Omega, who was and is to come.
Join me in prayer of confession. O Holy One, you showed us what it means to live by your reign.
Sharing food with the hungry, freedom with the imprisoned, justice with the oppressed, and joy with sorrow.
We ask your forgiveness, O Lord, for all the ways we fail to live as people who belong to your reign.
Show us once more what our belonging means. For you are the beginning, you are the end, and in every time in between. You fill our lives with grace.
Hear now the assurance of pardon. Now stand firm in your faith, covered by the saving grace of God, and ready to proclaim the gospel of peace.
Thanks be to God.
Peace of the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Now join each other in playful.
Peace, 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 peace.
There is hope in this rising of what's born from sacrificing. There is light in the dark for we who know His name. They who know His name find blessings from His throne. They who know His name do not face life alone. They who know His name find blessings from His throne. We who know His name do not face life alone. There is grace. There is rest. There is love. There is hope for me. His
Thank you, praise team. Very inspiring as always. We're back to the lectionary readings, and this is a particular Sunday in the lectionary calendar. We'll reflect on that. So we go to the passage that is assigned for this Sunday from John, the Gospel according to John, chapter 18, verses 33 to 37. This passage comes on the heel of the farewell speech that Jesus gave his disciples before he was crucified in the Gospel according to the Gospel of John, chapter 14 through 16, and then chapter 17 we have the longest recorded prayer of Jesus, where Jesus is also preparing his followers as he would be crucified. So in chapter 18 we have the betrayal and the arrest of Jesus, and then he is brought to questioning before the high priests in the Sanhedrin, the high council of authority and among the Jewish leadership, and then they decide to take him to Pilate because they have no authority to conduct an execution. So here's what they set up. And as I mentioned before, the word Jews, whenever we read it, it is not a derogatory term. It is meant simply to reflect on the leadership of the people, the religious leadership of the people. So we must take it in that context. I would prefer if we would call it the Hebrews, but the term to the Jews, meaning to the leadership, the Sanhedrin, from the religious authorities. So we read from a few verses from chapter 18:32. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. what have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. Pilate asked him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Pilate asked him, what is truth? This is God's word. So in the lectionary we have this Sunday that is called Christ the King Sunday. I guess I have to drink this cup. We have this Sunday that is called in the lectionary Christ the King Sunday. Very strange name and title. Jesus never self-identified as a king. Jesus never taught or in any way insinuated that he was a king. And in the trial, we see how this concept comes about. That they accuse Jesus of claiming to be the king. The religious authorities, the Sanhedrin, the high priests, and the religious leaders accused Jesus of claiming to be king. And so he was brought to question before Pilate. Pilate was an agent of the crown. That's his role. And this is probably the highest profile person that Jesus met and confronted. And the way it's recorded, it's really very interesting and worth a lot of reflection. So Jesus encounters this Roman official who's an agent of the crown. And the accusation is a political. Jesus was crucified for sedition. The accusation is a political. Jesus is scapegoated and brought before a Roman agent, an agent of Caesar, saying that he claims to be king. Because the religious authorities could not find anything to fold Jesus' hand. So how can they get rid of Jesus? How can they have Jesus executed? They cannot even find anything in the law of Moses, that contradicts anything that Jesus said or done. There were some instances that they're trying to trap Jesus in his words and trying to find some contradictions with the law, but nothing of that stands. So the plan was to scapegoat Jesus and to claim that he's king, so that the agent of the crown would find Jesus guilty and have him executed on political charges. So we have this passage that we read today on this Sunday, Christ the King Sunday, or the reign of Christ. It is very obvious from the passage that Jesus denies this term. He says that I never proclaimed to be a king. You say so, or they say so. And in this context, we find us the need to reflect on how, in the history of the Hebrews, things started to go down. We reflected on the weeks before on the story of Ruth. And the book of Ruth, as we mentioned, starts with the statement that in the days of the judges, so that was prior to the kings, the people, after after some time, went to Samuel, who was the last judge, and says, we want a king. We want to be like the other nations. We want to have somebody to be a king. We don't want to be this humble, down-to-earth people. We don't want to be this known as this pious people. And we want to have a king. And Samuel said, well, do you know what you're asking for? You're asking for somebody who would conscript your children, your men to go to war, would make your women widows, and would enslave you, in essence. He said, yes, that's what we want. And Samuel took it personal and was very upset. God told Samuel, don't take it personal. You're a judge. Give them their wish. Similar to what God spoke to Moses about, they kept complaining that they left Egypt when they were enslaved in Egypt. And every time, every turn, they looked back and they want to go back. They want to go back to the pharaohs who were enslaving them. And but the end of it is that the worst period of the decline in this nation was when they installed kings, when they anointed kings, from King Saul, who was replaced by King David, who had the heir of King Solomon. And after King Solomon, the kingdom was split. And we have these kings from the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom that would fight one another, and both were conquered by two empires and were taken to exile, and the rest. So what the people thought that would be a high point in their lives, to have a king like the other nations, to surrender everything to the authority of one man. I recognize that there also could be queens, but in the history there were always men. To surrender everything, to be enslaved to the authority of a king who has absolute power, in their eyes was the height of civilization. It is also not very difficult to imagine that even today, we often have the tendency to pride in kings and queens. We pay money to visit their palaces. We pay money to see how wealthy they are, and we're just gasped in awe of how rich they are, and the art that they collect, and the palaces that they have, and everything else. And even in many parts of the world where kings are not acting authority, they have governments, so-called democratic governments, elected governments. The kings still maintain their wealth and maintain their image and maintain their authority. So this tendency to surrender everything to the authority of another, and to be enslaved and captivated by authority of another, is often also rubbed off in the church. Just like the authority is centered into one person, we often want to have somebody to decide for us, somebody to make the tough calls. And when we grumble, we say, well, that person is authority. So we have political kings, even in democracy. We call them politicians. We call them people who make decisions, even in our voting systems. And in our society, even in so-called democratic societies, we surrender authority and power and discretion to certain people, even though we know that they don't act in the best interest of the people. So Jesus is brought before this agent of the crown. And the agent of the crown begins the interrogation of Jesus. And Jesus says, evokes the word truth, aletheia, which we reflected on before. Lethia means to conceal. Aletheia is to uncover. And Jesus says, those who know me, they know the truth. And Pilate makes the comment at the end of this passage that we read, what is truth? What needs to be concealed? Later on in chapter 19, verse 15, the next chapter, Gospel of John, he's trying to he washes his hands and he says, I did not find anything at fault with this man. And they say, well, we have no king but Caesar. This is the crowd led by the religious authorities. And they say, we want him to crucify and we want him to be placed. We want you to let go the criminal, Barabbas, in place of Jesus. And they say, we have no king but Caesar. We have no king but the emperor. The religious authorities who claim that God is the sovereign, at this point, they declare that Caesar is the king. And we have Jesus who rejects that Caesar is the king. He's on trial for falsely claiming to be the king, a rival to Caesar, or inciting a religious or a rebellion, civilian rebellion against the crown and Jesus' institution. We have no king but Caesar. We have no king but the president. We have no king but the Congress. We have no king but the Supreme Court. You can go around and say that we will submit our intellect and our understanding and all what we think of to a power of somebody or a handful, and we take our cues from them. I like to call this Christ the shepherd. Jesus did say who he is. It's several times, and did identify as the shepherd. Thanks for the slide. And I would love if I have some authority to change this title of Sunday in the lectionary instead of Christ the King to Christ the Shepherd. And the role of the shepherd is very different than that of the king. The shepherd's job is to feed, to provide for, to nurture, to protect, not to conscribe, not to abuse, not to take advantage of, not to enslave, not to rob. And we see that comparison in the same gospel in chapter 10 when Jesus compares himself as the good shepherd and says, all those who came before me were thieves and bandits and killers. I am the good shepherd. I came to give life. John 10:10. I came to give life and to give it abundantly. So Christ the shepherd. Out of rebuke to the kings of Israel, the prophets, who also were raised by God because the religious leadership were so corrupt, that God raised prophets. And these prophets would call on the kings and use the term shepherd as a rebuke, as a critique, and refer them often as shepherds. In essence, shame on you, king. You are the shepherd of the people. You are not there to slaughter the people of the Capitol. And when we reflect on the king that was anointed to replace Saul, he was anointed when he was a shepherd boy. Samuel went to anoint a king and went to the house of Jesse, who is a grandson to Ruth. And Jesse paroles in front of him his sons from the eldest. And Samuel says, no, that's not the one. The next, the next, the next. And then all of them, he rejects them all. And then Samuel asks, don't you have any other children or any other sons? And Jesse says, yeah, I have a lad, a boy, who's in the field taking care of the sheep. And Samuel says, summon him up. I want to see him. And when he summons him, the Spirit tells Saul that this is the one that you are. A lad, boy, shepherd. Jeremiah, in his call, chapter 1, God tells Jeremiah, don't say that you are a boy, that you are a lad, because I have called you. So the king that was anointed to rival Saul, who has fallen in the eyes of the Lord, was a shepherd. All the patriarchs and matriarchs in the Old Testament were shepherds and shepherdesses. That's the encounter, that's the life story of Abraham and Sarah. That's the story of Isaac, how Isaac met his wife Rebekah. Jacob and his clan, they were all shepherds. There is a reason that God communicates to us and we communicate with one another not as kings or queens, not as people of authority and people subject to the authority, not to be exploited and not to exploit others, but the way, the nurturing, the pastoral approach, the pastoral way. The word pastor in Latin means shepherd. This is how we Presbyterians, how we Christians, how we people are called to relate to one another as pastors, as shepherds. The calling to us comes to us in this class. So what is the good news in this? The good news finally comes as Caesar tells Jesus, the agent to the crown, Pilate says to Jesus, what is aletheia? What is to be concealed or to be uncovered? It is the writings on the wall. You have been scapegoated. I don't find any fault at you, but they want you to be executed. And when we read the story later, that's exactly what he does. So sometimes the good news comes in the story of people whom we scapegoat. The authorities scapegoat. When we discount people who are outsiders, who are unqualified or unfit or undeserving, based on our own way, humanly ways of thinking. We think of power, we think of looks, we think of the ability to control, the ability to wage wars,